Hello, I hope that you're keeping warm today and enjoying your day off. Uh, Continuing with day 3 of our statistics lesson on section 10.4, other sampling designs. As I said at the end of the last video, I am going to show the answers now for 10.4 day 2, your book assignment, just so you can double check your work. Here are the answers. You're welcome to pause the video right now and take a look at it. Your answers should be, for some of them, a little more detailed and with an explanation, but at least you can double check that you understand what you were doing for those. All right, I'm going to move back on to 10.4, day 3. So today we are going to continuing with our sampling design. I'm going to ask you and walk you through how to design a sample or a survey. As we continue with this, again, here are essential questions. We are going to be talking about how we use randomness in this particular sample. But most importantly, we're trying to generalize from a sample to the population. So we're going to plan a sample, say what we had done, and then actually talk about the summary. So I'm going to give some results of our fake sample today, and we can talk about what we can generalize from the population from that. Continuing with the same objectives that we have been for the past couple days. So in today's example, and hopefully you've printed the notes for today's. If you have not, you want to pause the video right now and go print 10.4 day 3 blank notes. That is on the portal as both a file and attached to a homework assignment. So you should hopefully be able to find that. If you can't, you're welcome to send me an email and I'll tell you where to find those. All right, moving on with the video. So in this example, you are given a stats assignment which says conduct your own sample survey to find out how many hours per week students at your school spend watching TV during the school year. My question to you is, if I were to ask you to do this or actually assign it, how would you design your survey? Stop and think about that for just a minute. You're welcome to pause the video if you'd like. Really, when you do try to plan this, there's going to be 3 parts to it. One, or design your survey. One is the actual plan. The second part is the sample itself. So you go out and you do the sample. And then part 3 is going to be your summary. What did I find out about the sample? How can I generalize that to the population? So here are the steps, and I have these outlined for you already on your sheet if you look down below the example. In our hours per week that students watch TV, our planning portion will include naming the population and the parameter, and then our actual game plan. That's our sampling plan. Then we're going to go out and do the sampling. And finally, we're going to summarize it. And your summary should always include when and how you conducted the survey, the number surveyed and the number of respondents, and our actual findings. So that's the statistic, the average number of hours students watch TV in this case. All of these steps that I have listed, you'll want to make sure you hold on to the sheet, because when you are asked to plan a survey, or design a sample, these are all the components that you will need to include as part of that plan. So let's do ours actually for the students per week. If you want to pause the video and try to answer these particular questions on your own, you can. You need to name the population and the parameter. Well, the population is the group at the whole. For ours, it's going to be all students in the school, in our case, Providence School. Parameter is the question you're trying to answer. So in ours, that's how many hours those students watch TV. Now, sampling plan. Sampling plan gets a little more challenging. This is where you want to ask yourself questions. Do you need to stratify this? In other words, are there different stratas or homogeneous groups that might have very, very different opinions? And I need to take that into account. You need to think about how you're going to do this. Remember, simple random samples are the gold standard, but sometimes those just aren't possible. So you might want to instead do a systematic sample, might be one way to do it. Another idea might be a cluster sample. Cluster samples are often fairly easy, especially with students, and we've talked about that. So if you want to think about that for just a second, also take into consideration how randomness will be used, because no matter which method you choose, you want to include randomness in there. So when I thought about mine, and I'm going to put a paragraph up that you're welcome to copy in just a minute, but I'm just going to speak for a minute. I didn't think, and these are just kind of notes, age and gender probably won't matter. So that means I'm not going to stratify. I think, and we've talked about this before, if I were to assign students, all the students in a school, a number, or just use their ID numbers, it's pretty hard to track them down. So simple random samples might not work for the school. It's going to be too difficult, probably pretty timely. It's going to take us just too much time to do a simple random sample. So instead, I could do a systematic or a cluster. Since students are just broken into classes naturally, I think a cluster might be the easiest way to do it. And we've discussed different types of classes before. All the students in Providence every year has to take theology. So I think choosing theology classes might be the easiest for me. Since I don't think age would matter, I don't need to stratify as in pick one freshman class, one junior class, one sophomore class, sorry, skip them, and one senior class. I can just randomly pick classes. I'm going to pick 5 classes. If I assume there's 25 to 30 kids in a class, I will have well over 100, somewhere between 1 to 200 students, which should be plenty for my sample. So I should have enough numbers. If you want to pause the video and write down this paragraph, this is what your sampling plan should look like. All those pieces that we went through in the notes are kind of your rough draft. But if I'm asking you to do a sampling plan, you want to take all those pieces and actually write down a few sentences as to how we do this. In this case, I believe age and gender won't matter enough to stratify. However, tracking down by simple random samples of ID numbers might be hard. Instead, I'm going to assign numbers to theology classes and randomly, there's my randomization, choose 5 using random number generator in my calculator. The one thing I didn't include in here, and this is also important in my paragraph, so I should add this in, is I will survey every student in those theology classes. Or at least attempt to get a survey from every student in those theology classes. You recall in cluster, you randomly pick which clusters to use, but then within that cluster, you want to survey or choose every person in those. And I think that's an important part of your sampling plan. All right, now we get into the make-believe of this. So let's pretend that we are actually going to do the sample. In your sampling plan and practice, this is how you're going to actually do this. So we talked about in our sampling plan what we were going to do. How am I actually going to get that done? Well, I'm going to give a survey to the theology teachers to have the students take in class. Another part of your plan and practice is what to do if you have non-respondents. In this case, if everyone's in the class, I can assume, hopefully, that the teachers can get all of the students to complete the survey and turn it in. But there may be students who are absent. So I do want to take that into account. I'm going to want to track down any absent students. Again, these are things you need to think about before you do a survey. It's important not to hand out the survey and have the theology teachers give it on a day when you know a lot of students are going to be absent, because you don't want to track them down. So you want to put some thought into those parts. Next up would be the summary. So let's pretend we went out, we gave the survey, we got the results back. Your summary should actually be in paragraph form. I'm going to list all the parts of it separately, though, but if you were writing this up, you would just include this as one paragraph. The first thing you want to include in your paragraph is when and how you conducted the survey. So again, in our make-believe survey, we did this, we'll pretend that we started the survey now, but perhaps we give the teachers a couple days and, within the next week, could you please give this survey to your theology students? Write it up like this. From 1:30 to 2:4:19, I had 5 randomly selected theology classes take a survey, which I had the teachers hand out. By having the teachers hand it out and giving it out over 5 days, this accounts for the absentee students. So I don't have to personally track them down. I'm asking the teachers to try to give it out on the 30th and then give them a couple more days in case there's absentee students. Is everyone still going to respond? No, there might be some absentee students that don't make it back in that. In my case, of the 147 pretend students I surveyed, 132 responded. Very good response rate in mine, but you would expect usually from a cluster to have a good response rate. That's part of the reason you use a cluster. And then our findings. So in my findings, in our pretend, of the 132 respondents, they reported. That's an important word. So I'm not saying that that is actually the amount of hours that they watch TV, and we'll talk about why people might give incorrect answers on a survey. But since we know that that is a possibility, you want to use the reported. Just like in other mathematics, when there's an approximate answer, you might use the word about and say, instead of saying something is exactly. In statistics, we want to use the word reported to let people know that we know that's not an actual number, but what the respondents told me. And then we have an average or a mean of 4.37 hours of TV per week from our 132 respondents. That would conclude your summary. Again, all 3 of those parts would just be written into one paragraph typically, but I wanted to just line it up this way so you understood everything that should be in there. For your homework this evening, you want to go to page 286 again, and then flip forward to number 40. I want you to complete both parts, A and B. A asks you to design a survey, and then B kind of changes things up a little bit and asks you to consider changing if a couple changes might change your sampling design. And yes, it should change it. So I want you to take that into consideration. Your answer for each part should be at least a paragraph of your complete plan, including the population parameter and sampling plan, right as if you are an employee of the company presenting your plan to the supervisor. In this, I would also suggest that you talk about your practice, the actual sample, how you would give the sample out, taking into consideration any non-respondents, like we had the absentee students, listed that. You're not going to include the summary in this. You don't need to make up some pretend numbers for this one. Later on, we will do something with that. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day off. I'll see you tomorrow.